On nights when the river turned its skin to glass, it returned what the living tried to drown. The River Niger had always been more than water to the people of Lokoja. It was history flowing between banks, a wide, restless storyteller that whispered to fishermen in the dark and carried secrets from villages upstream down to the ocean. On calm nights, when moonlight turned its surface into glass, the elders said the river returned what had been stolen or hidden, as if it could not bear to keep lies forever. Water forgets paths, they would say, but not faces. That proverb carried weight in every canoe, every net, every whispered prayer. And in one of those nets, on a humid evening after a flood pulse, Adaeze Obi found what would change her life. She was 21, slim and strong from years of diving. Adaeze lived by the river's rhythm, slipping into its depths with a calm fearlessness others envied. Her eyes were sharp, her hands quick, and her lungs seemed designed to hold breath longer than most. People came to her not because she was loud or boastful, but because she was dependable. If a fisherman lost his paddle, if a child dropped a necklace into the water, if a tourist's phone tumbled from a shaky canoe, Adaeze would dive, retrieve it, and charge a small fee. It was never enough to make her rich, but it was enough to keep her grandmother fed and the roof above their heads patched with zinc. That day the river had swelled after days of rain, carrying uprooted shrubs, broken calabashes, even goatskins swollen with water. Adaeze cast her net with practiced skill, expecting fish or debris. But when she pulled it in, her arms strained against a weight that felt wrong. Caught in the mesh was not a fish, but a mud-caked rectangle wrapped in weeds, tangled with charms, bottle stoppers, shells, and a rusted padlock sealed shut with iron corrosion. The elders called such clusters river locks. They were omens, meant to bind secrets to water. Adaeze's chest tightened as she freed the object from the net. It was a smartphone, heavier than it should be, waterlogged and silt-stained, yet intact. She turned it over, watching mud flake from the cracked glass. Her grandmother, Mama Onome, would have told her to throw it back immediately. But Adaeze was practical. A phone meant resale, if not use. She tucked it into her basket and paddled back to shore, humming one of the fishermen's songs to steady her nerves. Their home was nothing grand, a wooden shack near Kabawa, propped above damp earth. Inside, Mama Onome sat on a raffia mat, her back curved with age, her eyes still fierce beneath the fog of cataracts. She coughed often, and the medicine from the chemist was too expensive to buy regularly. Rent was overdue. The boat's engine sputtered dangerously every trip. Adaeze was their only breadwinner, and the river was her employer. She laid the phone gently on the floor, wiping away mud with her wrapper. That evening, while buying smoked fish at a riverside stall, Adaeze's eyes met Femi Adeyemi's. He was 24, tall, with broad shoulders, and his hands bore the calluses of someone who repaired more than machines. He fixed what he could not afford to replace. He ran a solar charging kiosk and mended radios, torches, and phones for Kabawa's fishermen and traders. His smile was quiet, the kind that didn't rush but stayed with you. He had admired Adaeze for months, her grit, her refusal to be cowed by men who mocked her diving work. They exchanged only glances and small nods then, but the seed of something unspoken had begun to grow. That night, as crickets sang and lanterns flickered, the strange phone pulsed in the dark. Adaeze jerked awake to see the cracked glass faintly glowing. A vibration buzzed weakly, though no SIM was inside. On the lock screen was the blurry image of a toddler's hand pressed against glass, like a child leaving a mark on fogged windows. Beneath it, notifications scrolled. Missed calls from Chairman and Chief O. Her heart hammered. She had no business knowing names that sounded too heavy for her world. She carried the phone to her grandmother's mat. Mama Onome stirred from sleep, her face lined with dreams. In a trembling voice she said, "I saw her, Adaeze. Osun, the river mother. She poured water from a calabash into the current. She told me, 'Return what is not yours or cleanse it of lies.'" The words chilled Adaeze more than the night breeze. For hours she sat, torn between fear and curiosity. Throw the phone back, and the river would reclaim its lock. Keep it, and perhaps it could be worth enough to fix the engine, buy medicine, pay rent. But deeper than money, a strange pull gripped her. She felt the river had chosen her not randomly, but deliberately. The following morning, she carried the phone to Femi's kiosk. He looked up, startled, as she placed the mud-streaked object on his workbench. "It came from the river," she said simply. His brow furrowed. "Phones die in water," he replied, wiping his hands. Yet when he touched the power button, a faint blue spark flickered beneath the cracked screen. Femi looked into Adaeze's eyes, worry mingled with something else, curiosity, maybe even awe. "This one doesn't want to stay dead," he murmured. Adaeze straightened her back, determination hardening her voice. "Then we must hear what it wants to say. If truth is inside, we will hear it." She did not know yet that those words would bind her to a journey of danger, love, and betrayal, one that would unravel not just her life, but the carefully constructed mask of a man too powerful to ever admit weakness. As Femi adjusted the solar charger, a tiny blue light blinked beneath the cracked glass. The dead phone woke itself. Some screens show faces. This one showed consequences. The morning heat gathered early over Kabawa, tilting the air with a thickness that made metal taste faintly of salt and dust, and inside Femi's kiosk, the sun pushed through sheets of clear plastic roofing in blunt rectangles, laying bright squares across a workbench already crowded with Torx screwdrivers, braided charging leads, a magnifier lamp clouded by smudges, and a small ultrasonic cleaner whose chrome belly quivered whenever it hummed to life. Adaeze stood half in the doorway and half in the light, her fingers pressed to the frame as if steadying herself against whatever secrets the river had sent to their table. And Femi, sleeves rolled, eyes narrowed to a careful patience, began the delicate ritual that separates salvage from resurrection. He folded a strip of lint-free cloth and dabbed at the phone's seams until mud stopped blooming from the edges, then warmed the back panel with a heat gun that blew a soft, disciplined breath, loosening adhesive that had hardened into a stubborn second skin. When the panel lifted, the interior revealed itself with a kind of shamed honesty. Tiny screws seated like stars, a swollen battery scabbed with silt, a motherboard freckled with pale corrosion where the river had kissed it too long. He did not speak in flourishes. He narrated quietly, a craftsman talking for the benefit of focus and of the woman whose gaze, he had learned, never wasted itself on the trivial. He unplugged the battery with tweezers, wicked away water with isopropyl swabs, and bathed the logic board in the ultrasonic cleaner, whose subtle buzz turned clouded solvent into a shimmering bath that lifted grit from pathways thinner than hair. Adaeze watched as if hypnotized, the small muscle in her cheek flicking each time an unexpected speck lifted from a trace, and despite the weight of the unknown, she teased him the way a river teases a boulder, gently but insistently, asking whether he preferred saving phones or saving the people attached to them, and he answered that in his experience saving one often required saving the other. When he set the board under a lamp to dry and routed a solar trickle from the kiosk's panel through a calibrated charger, the gesture carried the reverence of lighting a vigil candle, and though neither of them named it, the space between their words grew warmer, the kind of warmth that arrives not with declarations but with shared watchfulness. Hours stretched, measured by the mild tick of the charger's status LED and the soft grit of sand under their sandals each time they shifted weight. Outside, the river carried voices from boats nosing the bankfish prices bargained with weary humor, gossip flung like nets, a hymn hummed by an old man whose tenor had been softened by decades of harmattan. Inside, Femi reassembled the phone with careful pressure, spread a bead of contact cleaner along the power button, and seated a thin, clean battery whose wrapper still smelled faintly of factory plastic. He looked at Adaeze, and in that glance lay both warning and invitation, because the next press would decide whether courage had been wise or merely stubborn. The screen trembled then, like a fish twitching on a line, and bloomed not into color but into a pale emergency interface, the kind manufacturers build as a final mercy when systems have drowned. The letters were small and unsympathetic, but legible. At the top, a single bar of signal limped to life. Below, a cascade of queued system notifications unfurled as if the device, freed from water, had found its voice and was rushing to catch them up on all that it had been forced to swallow. Vault updated, transfer confirmed, geotag saved. Location pings appeared as tiny icons, tagged to coordinates Adaeze did not know but whose names, when Femi opened the map preview, curled like warnings along the coast mangroves near Escravos, creeks that braided behind oil terminals, inlets where barges slept like patient beasts. Her stomach tightened. She had never walked those mangroves, yet every fisherman knew the rumors, because rumors travel faster than clean water, hidden siphons stabbing pipelines, night crews ferrying black wealth through channels the law pretended not to see, policemen bribed to tie their own blindfolds. She had salvaged trinkets and coins and, once, a wedding ring from the arms of the river, but never a breadcrumb trail stamped with the quiet confidence of a machine that had witnessed men trespass against entire communities. They moved from the map to the gallery because the notifications tugged them there, and among thumbnails of ordinary life faded sunsets, a toddler's palm pressed to glass, a restaurant menu shot for forgetful convenience lurched a folder that did not belong in anyone's casual archive, videos divided by private. The first thumbnail carried the smiling face of Chief Obiora Nwachukwu, the philanthropic CEO of Meridian Delta Logistics, captured in a crisp still as he cut a ribbon with a governor whose teeth shone like billboards. Adaeze had seen him once on television, blessing fishermen with fuel vouchers while cameras panned to women clapping. The man on the screen wore benevolence like a custom garment, and yet the place where the video had been shot was a hall whose windows reflected both chandeliers and the cold glass of a display case where awards sat like obedient trophies. When Femi played the clip, the volume came alive with clapping, and the chief's voice poured out smooth as palm oil, thanking dignitaries, promising community, placing a hand theatrically on his chest in the gesture that wins audiences who have learned to mistake performance for sincerity. "Public face," Femi murmured, thumb hovering above the software keys. "Let's see if there's a private one." They should have stopped. They both knew it. And yet curiosity, that underrated engine of justice, urged them into the next layer. The app drawer looked unremarkable until Adaeze noticed a small blue icon labeled Tide Notes, whose permissions, when Femi flicked them open, made no sense for a simple notepad. Full storage access, microphone, location, hidden overlays. It took him less than a minute to peel back the disguise and expose the vault beneath, a tidy catalog of secrets wrapped in a friendly name. Inside lay voice notes marked with dates that corresponded to the geotag pings, barge manifests listing capacities that would drown a village in fuel, payment ledgers couched in euphemisms, community facilitation, marine security honorarium that translated easily into bribes, and a video whose first frame was darkness pierced by one sallow lamp on a river barge. When the camera steadied, a half-circle of men came into view, faces shadowed, caps pulled low, and in the jitter of the lamp, a crest ring flashed as a hand cut the air to punctuate orders. Words were scarce but conclusive. Routes named by creek, dates aligned with tide, a reference to blue tarps on the graves, if it spills. Adaze's throat tightened, not only because of what the files implied, but because the device had held them in its ceramic body like a coffin holds a confession. She had brought up cargo that mattered to individuals. This, she realized, mattered to a river, to a coastline, to families whose nights had been haunted by the smell of crude. She scrolled to the messages, hands steady though her breath was not, and there the phone's softer ache surfaced. A contact saved simply as E, whose text began practical and ended desperate. "He knows. If I vanish, tell my sister. Check the jetty box." They burned the test footage. The timestamps ran up to a night that matched the flood pulse, after which her net had snagged the device. Femi set the phone gently on the workbench and braced his palms on either side of it, as if the wood might otherwise tilt. "This is not a prize, Adaeze," he said, the words careful because he respected her instinct to hunt truth, but also the scale of what glared from the glass. "This is evidence. Evidence kills and saves, but only if carried properly." She nodded, though her jaw clenched, because river ethics tugged in two directions at once. Inside her return what is not yours, and yet cleanse lies when they float to your hands. Mama Onome's dream whispered at the back of her mind, like a current under a boat. Return it, or cleanse it. When she reached for the phone again, A brief sting flared across her palm where rope burn from yesterday's catch had split skin, and without comment, Femi took her hand, turned it over, and cleaned the raw line with spirit. The sharp smell rose between them. She did not pull away. He wrapped the wound with a strip of gauze cut from a first aid roll, the gentleness of his fingers contradicting the grease on his nails, and when he tied the knot, he held her gaze a second longer than repair demanded, a pause in which gratitude and fear and an unnamed tenderness negotiated new boundaries. Trust, she realized, had begun to live here, not as a promise but as an accumulation of small, steady mercies. He slid the SIM tray out with a pin and kept it empty. He toggled airplane mode, then went deeper into developer settings to kill radios that sometimes wake even then. He mirrored the vault to a micro SD and set 2 cloud syncs crawling over a borrowed data bundle that would trickle proof into places no local outage could starve. He explained what he was doing with the same unhurried clarity he used to explain a solder joint to a nervous customer, and the ordinary dignity of his voice steadied her better than any sermon could have. They did not see the complication at first because it wore a bland face. When the battery indicator jumped from red to a stuttering orange, and the system, proud of its survival, pinged a network out of habit, a location service flickered alive in the background and cast a tiny beacon into the air, the kind of pulse that rarely matters unless someone is listening. Somewhere, whoever had lost or discarded the device received a silent nudge that the dead had shifted in its coffin. Femi saw the log a second later and cursed under his breath, killing radios again, but air does not take back what it has already carried. Adaeze's heartbeat changed tempo. Folk warnings and practical risk married in her chest, producing a fear that did not rattle her hands but sharpened everything she saw. Through the kiosk's plastic wall, she watched 2 men in neat polos walk along the riverfront with the forced casualness of people performing a role for a camera that might not exist. Their shoes were too clean for the mud. Their eyes passed over stalls without truly seeing the goods. One of them stopped to ask a fisherman whether any lost phones had washed up after the recent flood, then smiled broadly when the man shrugged and moved on, leaving behind the faint smell of cologne that did not belong to river work. Femi followed her gaze and did not speak, because there are moments when naming danger gives it precision but also invites it closer. He slid the phone into a plain cloth pouch, dropped the pouch into an empty battery carton, and nudged it beneath a shelf with his foot, then wiped his hands and turned to the doorway with the bored posture of a man whose greatest worry was a blistered power bank. The 2 men reached the kiosk and smiled with the ease of professionals who have rehearsed their friendliness into muscle memory. "Good afternoon," the taller one said, his accent smoothed until it could pass in any Lagos boardroom. "We're looking for a device that may have been found around here. There's a handsome reward for anyone who returns it. No questions, no trouble." The other produced a fat envelope as proof that generosity travels with them. Adaeze did not step back, but the river inside her did. 2 men in neat polos stood at the kiosk's door, envelope bulging between their fingers, their voices warm as they offered a fat reward for a lost phone. In cities of glass, the richest men keep mirrors that reflect only what they can survive. By the time the men in polos drifted from the kiosk with their envelope unopened and their smiles still sharp as blades, Adaeze understood that the river had handed her something heavier than any net she had ever pulled in. Femi locked the kiosk, slipped the cloth pouch with the revived phone into his satchel, and together they walked through Kabawa's narrow lanes, their shoulders brushing, silence heavy. Every footfall seemed to echo the proverb her grandmother repeated whenever fishermen boasted of escapes: "Water does not forget the face that tries to drown in it." Later that night, with lanterns swinging in their one-room home and Mama Onome dozing nearby, they opened the phone again and began to comb through its vault, as though it were both an archive and a crime scene. What unfolded was a life with 2 faces. On one face, Chief Obiora Nwachukwu, the man Nigerians knew from evening news bulletins. His charity videos played across the screen like rehearsed sermons. The CEO of Meridian Delta Logistics in Prest Egbata, wading ankle-deep into rivers with reporters crowding behind, blessing fishermen with fuel vouchers, and smiling as he handed over scholarships to wide-eyed children in uniforms. Anchors called him the Saint of the Delta. Dignitaries posed beside him, and in glassy corporate towers his portrait hung with captions about philanthropy. His voice oozed benevolence. "We believe in people, in water, in future." On the other face, hidden inside the vault folder, the mask dropped. Ledger files exposed illegal bunkering routes, traced from oil terminals to hidden mangrove coves near Escravos. Payment sheets listed security honorariums that were, in truth, bribes to policemen, naval officers, and politicians. A scanned roster, marked confidential, contained names of officers on his payroll, men sworn to protect the nation's arteries, now guarding his theft. Another document revealed property in Abuja, leased under the name Chike Odili, an alias that kept his private pleasures hidden from the halo of his public image. Adaeze's fingers shook as she scrolled through a set of voice notes. One file, marked only with a date, opened to the weary voice of a man. "Pipeline bypass done," it said, hurried, breathless. Then, lower, "But they burned the boy who recorded it." The voice identified itself at the end. Ejiro Okoro, engineer. Adaeze and Femi looked at one another, the silence between them filling with dread. Whoever E was, he had been close to the truth and had understood what betrayal cost. The videos carried visual patterns that stabbed at Adaeze's instincts. In one, a barge rocked gently as men in hooded jackets stood in half-light. A crest signet ring gleamed as orders were given. In another, barrels wrapped in blue tarps were rolled into storage. Again and again, the same motifs returned. The crest, the barge IDs scrawled in chalk, the blue tarps like flags over hidden bodies. Adaeze spread the clips across a grid on Femi's laptop, mapping patterns with the same precision she used to untangle nets. "These are not accidents," she whispered. "They are trails." But even as they gathered threads, danger spread its own. The men who had offered the reward returned to the docks the next day, this time with a camera phone flashing discreetly. A fisherman later told Adaeze that someone had taken her picture, sliding it into a group chat filled with numbers she would never see. That night she noticed strangers loitering near their stall, their attention just a little too sharp, their questions too casual. Back at home, Mama Onome listened to her granddaughter's trembling recount and shook her head with the certainty of one who has watched seasons fold into one another. She lifted a small pouch from a calabash of charms, drew out a polished cowrie shell, and tied it to Adaeze's wrist with fraying thread. "The river keeps secrets only for those who don't sell them," she said firmly. "But when secrets are stolen, they will chase their thief. Wear this, and remember the water chose you." Adaeze bent to kiss her grandmother's forehead, eyes stinging with unshed tears. That evening, as the heat broke into rain and drops clattered on zinc roofing, Femi finally allowed himself to confess what he had been holding in silence. He turned to Adaeze, his voice low and earnest. "I am afraid for you," he said, calloused fingers tightening around the edge of the workbench. "For us, these men are not thieves of fish. They are thieves of blood. They will not stop." Adaeze met his eyes, her own voice steady, though her heart thudded. "I fear owing the truth more than I fear them." The words landed between them like a vow, and Femi knew then that he was bound not just by affection but by the kind of loyalty that walks willingly into storms. Together they made their choice. They would mirror the data onto SD cards and seed it into clouds beyond reach, ensuring no single theft could silence the evidence. Then they would seek out a reporter too stubborn to be bought, someone who would carry the truth without trembling at envelopes or threats. But even resolve cannot soften the sound of danger's engine. That night, as they sat cross-legged on the mat, organizing files into neat folders, the low growl of a black Hilux drifted through the rain, stopping outside their compound. Its headlights dimmed, but the motor kept running, steady, patient, like a predator unwilling to reveal its teeth just yet. A black Hilux idled outside their compound engine, never turning off, its presence heavy as the river itself. When money arrives before apologies, it has a job to do. Morning in Lokoja came with the crackle of market voices and the tang of smoke drifting over the river. Adaeze had barely slept. The black Hilux had not moved. Until dawn, its engine idling through the night like a threat whispered in steel. By sunrise, it was gone, leaving only the stink of exhaust and the certainty that eyes were watching them now. She had not told Mama Onome, but her grandmother sensed something anyway. The old woman's cough was sharper. her gaze lingering on her granddaughter's wrist where the cowrie charm rested, as though it alone might anchor Adaeze in stormy waters. They did not wait long for the next move. By mid-morning, a man in a navy blue suit appeared at Femi's kiosk. He was tall, his shoes polished to an unnatural shine for riverbank mud, and he carried an expensive leather folder tucked beneath his arm. His smile was the kind that offered warmth while measuring your worth at the same time. "Miss Adaeze, Mr. Adeyemi," he said smoothly, his voice coated with city inflection. "I am here on behalf of interested parties. We understand a certain misplaced item may have come into your possession." He did not name the phone, yet his words bent around it like branches hiding a path. From the folder, he produced a sealed envelope thick with currency. He laid it on the table as though it weighed nothing, though it hit the wood with the thud of temptation. 10 million. Simply return what is not yours. No questions, no consequences. Femi had prepared himself for this moment. He adjusted the camera phone he had hidden behind a pile of chargers, letting its lens drink in every gesture. Adeze's fingers trembled slightly as she touched the envelope, feeling its weight. 10 million could transform her life. Pay off rent for years, fix the engine, buy medicine, build something beyond survival. Yet as her hand closed, she felt again the words of her grandmother's dream: return it, or cleanse it of lies. She looked the emissary in the eyes and pushed the envelope back across the table. Not for sale. The emissary's smile did not falter, but a thin line hardened around his eyes. He tapped the envelope once with manicured fingers before sliding it back into his folder. "Water also drowns the stubborn," he murmured, voice still velvet, though it carried a blade. Then, without another word, he turned and walked into the sunlight, shoes leaving no stain on the mud. That afternoon, the river delivered its own warning. Along one bank, tilapia floated belly up in clusters, their silver scales dull in the light. Children who came to play stopped and ran back screaming. Elders gathered and muttered of pollution, of chemicals dumped upriver, of spirits angered. "The river is spitting back what it cannot keep," an old fisherman said, shaking his head. Adaeze stood on the bank watching the current carry the dead fish away, her stomach twisting. The omen was clear. The water had turned witness, and witnesses demanded reckoning. The warnings grew closer. A friendly officer who often bought power banks from Femi stopped him quietly outside the kiosk. "You're trending in the wrong chat," he whispered, glancing over his shoulder. "Your names are being passed around. Men in places you don't want to meet are asking about you." He pressed a hand briefly on Femi's shoulder, then walked away before questions could follow. By nightfall, the threat became fire. Adaeze and Femi returned from the market to find smoke curling from their wooden shack. Neighbors were already shouting, passing buckets of river water in frantic lines, but flames chewed quickly at the dry wood. The blaze swallowed bedding, nets, their little store of belongings. Inside, Mama Onome coughed violently as two women pulled her out, her wrapper singed, her breath shallow. Adeze's heart slammed as she pressed her grandmother's trembling body to her chest. She watched their home collapse inward, sparks rising like cruel laughter into the night. Loss has a taste, bitter and metallic. For Adaeze, it hardened into resolve. Standing barefoot in the mud, ash on her arms, she spoke as though to the river itself. "If the river gave us truth, we'll give it back to the people." The next morning, they sought help outside the walls of fear. Femi had heard of a woman named Amara Nweke, a freelance blogger in Onitsha, who had earned both enemies and respect for refusing bribes, publishing what others buried. Her site ran stories that mainstream outlets ignored, and her name carried a weight that made officials squirm. "She won't be easy to reach," Femi said, "but she won't sell us either." Adaeze agreed. It was time to carry the phone where its contents could not be silenced. They prepared for departure with the care of fugitives. Adaeze wrapped her hair in a scarf, exchanged her usual wrapper for borrowed trousers and a faded t-shirt. Femi smeared engine grease on his hands and cheeks, passing as another laborer. The phone, wrapped in plastic, was hidden in a bait bucket beneath scraps of fish. They waited for the moon to rise before slipping onto a night boat bound upriver, its motor coughing quietly, its hull heavy with passengers carrying baskets and secrets. The water stretched black and endless before them, reflecting stars like scattered salt. Adaeze held the bait bucket close to her feet, her grandmother's cowrie charm pressed against her wrist, whispering a silent prayer into the night wind. As the boat pushed deeper into darkness, Adaeze's own phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. She opened it. The screen glared against her face. A photo of their shack, charred wood and ash still smoking. Beneath it, 3 words. Last warning. The emissary's text burned on the screen, a photo of their burnt room, captioned only, "Last warning. Truth travels poorly unless it finds feet willing to blister." Onitsha welcomed them with its usual chaos, honking buses jammed in traffic, hawkers pressing groundnuts and water sachets into weary hands, the air heavy with dust and exhaust. But in a nondescript block of flats above a tailoring shop, a woman named Amara Nweke opened her door to Adaeze and Femi. Her small apartment smelled of coffee gone cold, and its walls were plastered with maps, clippings, and the glow of laptops arranged like sentinels. She was younger than Adaeze had imagined, barely 30, but her eyes held the stubborn fire of someone who had already refused envelopes, threats, and friends who begged her to stop. "Come in," she said briskly, ushering them inside. "Let's see what the river carried this time." The phone was placed on her table like an offering. Amara's fingers flew across the keyboard as Femi narrated their findings. Within minutes, she was cross-checking barge numbers against shipping logs, layering timestamps from the phone's geotags over satellite imagery. Each coordinate pulsed in mangrove coves near Escravos, places the government maps called protected wetlands, but locals knew as smuggling arteries. She traced payments buried inside shell companies' fronts with cheerful names that dissolved into nothing when examined, but the trails kept returning to Meridian Delta subcontractors. Obiora's empire bled through every line of data, as steady and deliberate as oil spreading on water. Femi took over next, extracting the IMEI and digging into tower logs the phone had clung to before it drowned. With Amara's software, they aligned those pings with days when suspicious barge runs were reported. The picture sharpened. This was no ordinary CEO, no accidental oversight. It was orchestration. Behind the smile and scholarships was a man who built his wealth on siphons and silence. Then came the part that twisted the knife deeper. Amara pulled up profiles of missing youth reported near oil routes, boys who had left to work on the water and never came back. Among them, a face stopped Adaeze cold. The grainy photograph showed a teenager no older than 16, his eyes still carrying the stubborn gleam of hope. It matched the description of the boy who recorded it from Ejiro's voice note. He was gone, burned, buried, erased. The phone was his tombstone, and now she carried his story like an inheritance. That night, Adaeze stepped onto Amara's narrow balcony overlooking the restless city. The street below hummed with vendors and taxis, but up here was stillness. Femi joined her, his shirt damp from the humidity, his face shadowed by the streetlights. He leaned on the railing and spoke softly, his words barely rising above the night's hum. "If we run, Adaeze, I'll run with you. If we fight, I'll stand." The simplicity of it struck her harder than any oath. She turned to him, her chest tight, and whispered, "We are already standing." Back inside, Amara pulled up one more thread. The vault's GPS log marked a location labeled simply, Drop 17. A mangrove coordinate deeper in the delta, unexplained, unguarded. If the truth lay anywhere, it was there. They debated until the room's shadows grew long. Should they hand the files to Hawa at EFCC, wait for legal warrants, or risk everything by stepping into the mangroves themselves? Adaeze made the decision. "If the river gave me this," she said, holding up the phone, "then it means I must see where it leads, with my own eyes." Her conviction left little space for argument, so they prepared. Femi packed waterproof bags, loaded power banks, and downloaded offline maps onto 2 spare phones. Amara lent them a GoPro she used for risky assignments. Warning: evidence lives longer when it has many angles. Adaeze tied Mama Onome's cowrie charm tighter around her wrist, whispering a prayer into its shell. "Carry us like you carried the truth," she murmured. Before dawn, they slipped into a wooden boat with 2 community vigilantes. Mist hung low over the river, turning mangroves into ghostly cathedrals. Every paddle stroke seemed to echo in Adaeze's chest, every ripple a reminder of what might wait. The bait bucket with the phone rested between her feet, silent but heavy, as though the device itself knew it was being ferried to its birthplace. The morning broke pale and gray as they steered toward the coordinates. The closer they drew, the air thickened, not with fog, but with a sour smell that burned their noses. Dogs barked in the distance, whining uneasily. Then Adaeze's eyes caught it. Freshly turned mud mounds along the banks, damp earth that looked too deliberate, too arranged, to be natural. Her hand gripped Femi's arm, her heart hammering. They had not just stumbled into evidence, they had rode straight into graves. A foul stench hung over the mangroves, dogs whining from the shore, as the boat nosed toward freshly turned mounds of mud waiting to tell their story. Water hides everything until it refuses. The mangrove roots rose around them like the ribs of a giant, their twisted branches swallowing daylight into a damp green gloom. The sour smell thickened as the canoe nosed into the shallows, and Adaeze's throat closed against it. The vigilantes rode in silence, their teeth clenched, their eyes darting as though the trees themselves carried ears. Then the boat drifted past a patch of bank where the mud was newly turned. Adaeze leaned forward, her hand shaking as she pointed. There, half hidden beneath sagging earth, lay the corner of a blue tarp. When the men waded through the sucking mud and pulled it back, the river's secrets surfaced. Shallow graves, barely a foot deep, where bodies had been hurriedly covered and left to rot. ID cards, half-rotted, stuck to the sludge like confessions. A cracked lens phone lay face up beside one mound, as though its owner had tried to hold it until the last moment. Adaeze's stomach churned. She had always thought the river swallowed things forever. But here, it had spit back what could not be hidden. The vigilantes swore under their breath and gritted their teeth until their jaws ached. "Animals," one muttered, his eyes wet with rage. Adaeze raised Femi's borrowed camera. Her hands trembled, but she steadied herself enough to record. She did not film like a journalist hunting sensation. She filmed like a mourner, with slow, respectful pans. Her breath caught in her chest. Amara crouched nearby, sliding evidence into plastic bags she had carried in her satchel tarps, Idaho cards, the broken phone. Each item was logged, each mound's GPS marked on the map. "One day, a coroner will come," Amara whispered, "and these graves will have names again." But Adaeze could not wait for one day. She leaned over the riverbank, eyes burning, and whispered into the soil itself. "River, carry their names. Do not let them vanish." Her voice cracked, but it did not break. Femi came up behind her, his palm warm and steady against her shaking hands. He did not tell her to stop. He did not tell her to be strong. He simply held her hands still, steadying the camera until the frame was sharp again. The silence between them deepened into something stronger than words. Their romance did not need fireworks. It lived in that quiet, adult understanding he would be her balance when her hands shook, and she would be his courage when his voice faltered. But tenderness has no mercy when danger arrives. As she lowered the camera, the Vault app on the salvaged phone blinked with a sudden notification. Remote wipe initiated. A countdown appeared. 10, 9, 8. Panic erupted. "They've found it," Amara hissed. "They're killing the files." Femi reacted faster than thought. He yanked open the back, popped the battery loose, and stabbed at the power button while holding the board between his fingers. "Air gap it," he barked. He wrapped the phone in aluminum foil pulled from a snack pack, killing antennas, cutting off signals. Then he hooked his laptop with a homemade adapter and began a full disk clone, his fingers flying, his jaw tight with focus. Lines of code rolled across the screen as sectors copied, every percentage gain a small miracle. Adaeze and Amara leaned close, their eyes glued to the progress bar, every second feeling like a heartbeat stolen from fate. The countdown froze at 3 and blinked out. Femi's clone finished with a soft chime. They exhaled as one, but not before Adaeze's phone buzzed with a call. It was Mama Onome, her voice strained but clear. "Oh, son came again," she rasped. She says, "Hasten, the river runs faster now." When Femi examined the clone, they found they had salvaged most of the vault. Some files were corrupted, gone forever, but enough survived to wound an empire. Among them were thumbnails of boardroom threats, where voices snarled about silencing small mouths before they learned to shout. There were spreadsheets labeled cleanup budgets, cold numbers matched to names, now lying beneath mud. It was not everything, but it was enough to prove the shadow behind the halo. Adaeze closed her fist around the cowrie at her wrist, whispering thanks into the damp air. But before relief could root, the growl of an engine tore through the silence. A speedboat roared past the mangroves, spray slicing the water. A man in a baseball cap stood at the bow, lifting a camera phone, his lens aimed directly at their canoe. One snap. Two. Then the boat vanished into the channels, leaving churned water in its wake. They had proof, but now their faces, their boat, their exact location were captured. They had been seen. Deleting evidence is easy. Deleting witness memory is what monsters prefer. They had barely returned from the mangroves when the first warning came through. A neighbor from the Onitsha flat where Amara had sheltered them sent a frantic message. Photos of the door splintered, belongings flung across the floor, boot prints stamped in the dust. The raid had happened only minutes after they slipped away. Adaeze's blood ran cold as she stared at the images, her scarf on the ground, Femi's tools scattered like bones, Amara's wall maps ripped and torn. Whoever came had been searching, not stealing. They wanted the phone. That night, the walls of trust around them began to crumble. Journalists who had once promised support stopped answering calls. Two who had agreed to review Amara's files suddenly backed out, their silence heavier than threats. Adaeze's inbox filled with messages she didn't open, offers disguised as partnerships, their subject lines reeking of money. It was the kind of rot everyone in Nigeria knew. Silence was purchased cheaply, and courage was taxed until it bent. The network that had seemed strong shrank to a handful, and even those looked over their shoulders. Then, just as despair threatened to swallow them, a new name stepped forward. Inspector Hawa Danladi, zonal head at the EFCC office in Benin. She was meticulous, incorruptible, and known among officers as the one who counted receipts before she counted sleep. Amara reached her through an old contact, and within hours Hawa agreed to meet, but not in any office, not where walls have ears. The rendezvous was set for a church compound, a place where prayers rose louder than whispers. The meeting came at dusk. The compound smelled of candle wax and incense, its yard dim but safe. Hawa arrived in plain clothes, her posture straight, her gaze sharp. She did not waste time on pleasantries. "Evidence is like fish," she said, adjusting her glasses. "It rots if not handled properly. Show me what you have." They opened the laptop and spread out the cloned files, the images from the graves, the ledger copies. Hawa studied everything, her face calm, though her eyes burned with something fiercer than anger. "Chain of custody," she said briskly. She taught them how to hash each file, seal each bag, and document every hand it passed through. If we move too wide, courts will dismiss. So, we go narrow financial warrants first, catch him on what he cannot deny. When they parted, Adaeze felt something new, not safety, but direction. Hawa was not promising to save them, she was promising to fight beside them, and that was enough. That night on Amara's balcony, the air thick with diesel smoke from generators, Femi turned to Adaeze. His face was weary, but his eyes held steady. "If the river turns on us, I'll still stand with you," he said, voice low. She reached for his hand, their fingers interlocking. "And I'll stand with you. I fear nothing more than betraying what we've seen." Their vow was not dramatic, it was quiet, like two stones settling at the river's bottom, but it bound them tighter than any rope. While they whispered promises, Chief Obiora staged his counterattack not with thugs, but with fireworks. News splashed across Lagos stations. Meridian Delta to sponsor a massive river cleanup concert in Lokoja. Fireworks, scholarships, celebrity musicians, a celebration of water, community, and progress. The anchors beamed. To the public, it was another halo. To Adaeze, it was an alibi dressed as charity. She saw the trap immediately. Amara, though, saw an opening. "He wants cameras," she said, tapping the flyer with a nail. "Then let's give him cameras he can't control. We'll turn his concert into a courtroom." The idea took shape quickly. Project evidence before the crowd. Flood live streams with files before his PR machine could kill the story. A public trial in the open air, judged by thousands of eyes. The tools assembled like an arsenal of light. A drone projector borrowed from student activists. Cloud backups mirrored to diaspora streamers. Community youths trained to stream simultaneously so that even if one feed died, others would live. Each piece was fragile, but together they formed something harder than bullets to kill: visibility. They sat that night in the glow of Amara's laptop, plans scrawled on scraps of paper, cowrie charm glinting on Adaeze's wrist. The plan was mad, risky, maybe fatal, but it was their only path. Just before midnight, Adaeze's phone buzzed with an encrypted message. The sender's name was unknown, but the words carried the scent of blood and memory. "I was Ejiro's friend. He hid a drive near Kabawa Jetty." The message burned on the screen, pointing them back to the very waters where it had all begun. A hidden drive still waited, carrying a dead man's last truth. Silence is expensive. That's why the rich buy so much of it. When Amara uploaded her first draft, she expected the story to erupt like fire on dry grass. It had everything: ledger scans, video stills, GPS logs, even images of graves the mangroves had refused to keep hidden. Yet the next morning, nothing moved. National dailies that once begged her for exclusives politely declined. News anchors read out scripts praising Meridian Delta's corporate responsibility, parroting lines about Obiora's upcoming concert as if the whole country had been hypnotized. Then, Amara's inbox filled with envelopes, fat retainers, offers wrapped in corporate logos, messages couched as partnership opportunities. The silence was not natural. It had been bought, as it always was. In Nigeria, truth was cheap, silence was expensive, and the rich never failed to pay. The pressure spilled into the streets. At the Kabawa station, the local DPO intercepted Femi on his way home. The officer's voice was friendly, but his eyes cold. "Drop it," he said, adjusting the crease in his uniform, "or the river will keep you, and nobody will ask where you sank." He clapped Femi on the back like a brother, then walked away, leaving the warning dripping heavier than the rain. The next day, Femi returned to the market to find his solar kiosk locked. The union chairman waved a paper at him. License revoked pending inspection. It was a sham, but one that robbed him of livelihood. His stall was gone. His face marked. He walked home with fists tight, shame burning under his skin. Adaeze met him at the door, her expression steady. "They can close stalls," she said softly, "but they cannot close the river." And it was true. The river people stood by them. Market mothers let Adaeze sleep in storerooms, ferrying her in baskets past eyes that searched. Fishermen rowed them across creeks under moonlight, whispering, "For our sons who never came back." Their solidarity rose like a hidden current, invisible but strong enough to carry them forward. The hidden drive revealed itself almost as a blessing. Guided by the anonymous message, they slipped back to Kabawa's jetty under a rain-heavy dawn. The planks creaked under their weight, and beneath one, wrapped in a rusted tin, lay Ejiro's SSD. Femi cleaned it gently, heart hammering. When they played its audio, the room froze. A boardroom voice, sharp and commanding, named Obiora outright, linking him to Operation Blue Tarp. The words were clear: instructions for bribes, schedules for barges, warnings about cleanups that had cost lives. Ejiro had died for this, and now his last gift spoke with undeniable force. Inspector Hawa moved swiftly. With the SSD files in hand, she secured a narrow warrant limited to a Meridian Delta charity arm, the very same one that laundered bribes through school scholarships and cleanup grants. The timing lined up perfectly with barge runs. Each donation coincided with an oil siphon, each gala with a grave. The law was not yet a blade, but it was finally sharp enough to cut. They began to shape their stage. If the courts were locked, they would take their case to the crowd. Amara and Femi scouted Lokoja's Freedom Park, tracing the layout of the concert. They mapped the LED walls, checked the power lines, studied the blind spots where cameras could hide. Every angle was logged, every failure point mirrored with backups. Diaspora streamers across Europe and America volunteered to rebroadcast feeds. If one was cut, another would live. Their evidence would not sit in envelopes, it would sit in thousands of phones. Unkillable. One evening, as they finalized the plan, Adaeze held the phone in her lap and spoke aloud, voice low but unwavering. If the courts lock their doors, then we will seat the jury in the crowd. Let the people judge. The room fell silent, and in that stillness, even Amara nodded. 2 days later, the concert organizers published the official program. The headliner was a famous musician. Fireworks promised to light the sky. And at the center of it all, Chief Obiora himself would address the crowd at sunset. The program sheet glowed on Amara's laptop screen. At sunset, in front of cameras and banners, the man who wore 2 names would step into the light. The trap was set, but so was his stage. When villains throw a party, their alibis dance first. The riverside at Freedom Park in Lokoja had never looked so polished. Bright banners with Meridian Delta's logo fluttered in the evening air, printed with slogans about clean water and community hope. Children in matching branded t-shirts paraded through the crowd, waving flags they didn't understand, while drones hired by the organizers swooped overhead, recording smiling faces and clean, colorful angles for tomorrow's news. Musicians tuned their instruments, comedians rehearsed their lines, and the stage, built like a fortress of light and steel, waited for its master of ceremonies, Chief Obiora Nwachukwu. It was spectacle, carefully crafted, and it worked. To the thousands who gathered, it felt like a festival. To Adaeze, Femi, and Amara, it felt like walking into a lion's den dressed in lambskin. They had prepared their roles with precision. Femi stood near the sound booth, his satchel heavy with equipment. He had rehearsed the uplink a dozen times, connecting the drone's live feed to the laptop, then to the diaspora servers Amara had arranged. Amara herself crouched low in the camera pit with the accredited press, her DSLR clicking photos to disguise her real task, monitoring the feeds, rerouting them if sabotage struck. And Adaeze, cowrie charm tight around her wrist, moved through the crowd disguised as a vendor with a tray of roasted groundnuts, her sharp eyes scanning faces for danger. The danger was not long in showing itself. A sweep team of men with short haircuts and blue earpieces moved through the crowd, eyes scanning for anomalies. Adaze's heart lurched when she spotted a familiar group near the stage apron, the Hilux crew. The same faces that had idled outside her compound on that sleepless night now stood as guards in plain sight, their postures too stiff to be ordinary. She shifted her tray and lowered her gaze, but her pulse drummed in her ears. Then came the trigger. As the sun dipped low, bathing the Niger in molten gold, Chief Obiora mounted the stage. Cameras surged, drones swarmed higher, the crowd erupted in cheers. He lifted his hand in a familiar gesture, ring flashing under the floodlights, and began his well-rehearsed speech about purity of water and a brighter Nigeria. It was then that Femi, breath held, pressed the launch command. The drone rose from its concealed case, wings humming, camera tilting toward the LED walls. The evidence trailer, graves, ledgers, voice notes cued and ready to project. For a heartbeat, triumph felt possible. But villains do not throw concerts without rehearsing countermeasures. The LED screens flickered once, then blacked out. A generator groaned and died. Floodlights blinked into darkness. Gasps rippled through the audience as the sound cut to static. In the same instant, 3 hired thugs pushed through the sound booth, eyes locked on Femi. They moved fast, but the community moved faster. Market mothers surged forward, rappers flaring, ululating so loudly the thugs hesitated. Youths with phones drawn closed ranks around the booth, their bodies forming a shield. They bought Femi the seconds he needed. He ducked low, shoving the uplink cable into the backup battery. His laptop's light glowed faint but steady, tethered still to the drone above. And then, from the riverbank, a breeze rose. It was not strong enough to scatter the banners, but it carried a strange weight. Elders sitting under canopies looked up and murmured, "The water remembers." Adaeze felt the hair rise on her arms. Folk wisdom wasn't myth tonight, it was prophecy. Amara, seeing the sabotage, rerouted the drone's stream directly to diaspora channels. Though the LED walls stayed black, phones across the park began to flare alive, one by one, showing the first frames of the evidence trailer. The crowd, once restless, turned silent, staring at their handheld screens as images of tarps, barge manifests, and Obiora's crest ring filled the air in digital whispers. The trap was working, just not on the stage where he had expected, but victory was never clean. As Adaeze maneuvered closer to the stage, she felt rough hands seize her from behind. Two guards, their grips iron hard, dragged her backward. Her tray clattered to the ground, scattering nuts across the dirt. She twisted, but their hold only tightened. They shoved her through a side entrance, past curtains and cables, toward a darkened service tent. Her breath caught, her pulse thundered. Two guards forced Adaeze behind the stage, shoving her into the shadows of a service tent. The lion's den had closed its jaws. Love is not a place to hide, it is the hand you hold when running into fire. The service tent was dim, lit only by the spill of floodlights from the stage outside. Adaeze's wrists throbbed where the guards had gripped her. She was shoved into a folding chair, the ground littered with cables and discarded water bottles. Across from her sat a man in a neatly pressed caftan, his wristwatch gleaming in the shadows. He smiled as if this were a polite negotiation rather than a kidnapping. "You're a smart girl," he began, voice calm and oily. "Smart girls know when to leave rivers alone. 10 million. 20. We can arrange a visa. A life abroad, far from here. Be wise. Marry well. Forget the river." Adaeze's heart hammered, but her voice did not falter. "A calabash that carried blood should not return to soup," she said, her grandmother's proverb cutting like a blade. "Your money smells of graves." The aide's smile tightened, but before he could speak again, chaos rippled through the tent flap. A scuffle, shouts, the crack of fists against bone. Then Femi stumbled inside, battered shirt torn, lip bleeding but grinning through the blood. "You think you can lock her away from me?" he spat at the guards. He lunged forward, grabbed Adaeze's hand, and together they bolted through the tent's back flap into the confusion outside. The concert roared on, the stage lights flickering, the drone humming overhead. Adaeze led Femi toward the riverbank where the floating stage was anchored. Without hesitation, she kicked off her sandals and dove into the water. The cold shocked her body, but her strokes were strong. Beneath the stage supports, in the dim green light, she clipped a waterproof USB drive to the feed line. For a heartbeat, the cowrie on her wrist glinted in the river light, as though the spirit of Osun herself bore witness. She surfaced, gasping, water streaming from her hair, and dragged herself back onto the bank where Femi waited. Breathless, soaked, they clung to each other, laughter and fear tangled in their throats. "We're mad," Femi whispered, his hands cupping her face. Adaeze pressed her forehead to his. "If madness is truth, then let's be mad." In that moment, there were no cameras, no thugs, no concert, only two souls confessing what they had carried all along. "I love you," he said, "and I'll finish this with you, or not at all," she answered with the same words, sealing a vow stronger than fear. Her phone buzzed then, cutting through their closeness. A text from Inspector Hawa. "Wider warrant approved. If proof goes public tonight, we can move." Adaeze's chest tightened. This was it. No more delays, no more shadows. On the stage, Amara's voice hissed through the earpiece. "Powers patched, uplink stable, drones alive, projectors primed. We're all in." Adaeze squeezed Femi's hand. He nodded once, then sprinted back toward the sound console, wiping blood from his mouth, determination etched into his face. Amara's laptop glowed with final checks, her eyes sharp as a blade. The time had come. "Play everything," Amara said into the comms. But as Femi reached the console, Chief Obiora turned mid-speech. His gaze locked onto Femi's figure in the shadows. With practiced calm, the CEO slid his hand into the folds of his agbada. Adaeze froze as the fabric shifted and caught the metallic glint of a pistol. Chief Obiora's hand emerged from his agbada, steel flashing under the floodlights, pistol aimed at the man carrying their last chance. The river had delivered truth, but could it protect them from the bullet? Masks don't break quietly, they shatter like glass in a crowd. For a moment, time seemed suspended, the pistol glinting in Chief Obiora's hand, the stage bathed in fractured light, the crowd restless but unaware of how close they stood to a precipice. Then the LED walls, dark for what felt like eternity, flickered once, twice, and burst into life. The first image that blazed across them was a still frame of a barge at night, oil barrels stacked like silent witnesses, men's shadows long and bent. Gasps rippled through the park. Then came the spreadsheets, rows and rows of figures scrolling faster than the eye could follow, columns labeled security, honorarium, facilitation, cleanup. Names appeared, stamped with Obiora's company letterhead. And then the voice, Ejiro's weary confession. Pipeline bypass done. But they burned the boy who recorded it. Orders came from Obiora himself. Operation Blue Tarp. The words echoed across loudspeakers, carried by the drone's uplink, magnified by the diaspora stream, pumping it to thousands of phones around the world. The crowd shifted, murmurs turned to shouts. Volunteers in branded T-shirts lowered their flags, uncertain. Market mothers pressed closer, whispering prayers and curses in the same breath. Fishermen clutched their caps, their faces tight with recognition. And then the chant began, faint but swelling. We see you. We see you. The chant became a roar. Chief Obiora's composure cracked. He stepped toward the microphone, forgetting the pistol still half raised. His voice dropped its velvet mask. Shut it down or I'll... The boom mic caught every syllable, broadcasting his snarl across the park. The threat was undeniable, captured clean. Backstage, Femi froze as the pistol twitched higher. His body braced for the bullet. But before the shot could come, Adaeze moved. She stepped between them, her arms wide, her eyes burning with defiance. The river breeze rose suddenly, whipping through the drapes, lifting the stage cloth as if unseen hands wanted the truth revealed. For a heartbeat, the spectacle looked biblical, the brave girl shielding the man she loved, the corrupt giant cornered by his own lies, and the river wind itself testifying against him. Then sirens wailed. EFCC vans rolled in from the park's edges. Officers in plain green vests poured through the gates, their boots pounding, their hands firm on rifles. Hawa strode at their front, her voice clear and commanding. Lock the exits. Bag every file. Nobody leaves. Evidence teams moved with surgical precision, seizing the ledgers, photographing the ring that glinted on. Obiora's finger, sealing USB drives and SD cards into tamper-proof bags. On the giant screens, Amara's voice carried like a chorus. She narrated the sequence of proof. GPS points marking the mangrove graves, ledger lines tied to shell companies, charity accounts that matched barge schedules. This, she declared, is the true story of Operation Blue Tarp. This is the price of silence. The park erupted not in confusion, but in a chorus of defiance. Mothers ululated until their throats ached. Fishermen whistled, a sharp sound that cut through the night. Teenagers raised their phones high, chanting in unison, "We see you, we see you." Their chant drowned the concert, replacing music with truth. Obiora's hand trembled. The pistol wavered, then lowered slightly. For the first time in years, he looked like a man stripped of control. The mask, the halo, the performance all shattered. He glanced at the roaring crowd, at the walls of light replaying his crimes, and something inside him cracked. With a sudden burst of movement, he bolted. Shoving past his own guards, he sprinted off stage, the agbada flaring around him like torn wings. Hawa shouted. Officers lunged, but he was already cutting through the panicked crowd toward the docks. His ring caught the last stage light as he tore it from his finger and flung it into the river, as if that could sever the trail of proof. Adaeze and Femi chased, the crowd parting in chaos. At the river's edge, Chief Obiora leapt into a waiting speedboat, its engine coughing once before screaming into life. Spray fanned the dock as he shouted at the pilot. Within seconds, the boat roared away into the midstream darkness, its wake glowing under the moonlight like a scar. Obiora's silhouette hunched in the fleeing boat, engine shrieking into the night. The mask had shattered, but the man was not yet caught. Courts need judges, rivers need only memory. The night split open with the roar of Obiora's speedboat. The vessel lunged into the current, its motor shrieking like an animal in pain. On the dock, Adaeze's chest heaved, her breath catching on panic and fury. He could not be allowed to vanish into the dark, not after the river itself had labored to return his crimes. She turned, eyes sweeping the shore, and spotted a fishing skiff tied loosely to a piling, its rope tugged by the current. "Get in!" she shouted. Femi didn't hesitate. They leapt into the small wooden boat, untying it with frantic hands. Femi seized the outboard's tiller, yanking the cord until it sputtered and caught. The skiff shuddered, then jolted forward. Its wake foamed under the moonlight as it tore after Obiora's boat, the gap between predator and prey narrowing with every stroke of the propeller. Behind them, Freedom Park still glowed. The LED walls blazed with images of barge manifests and grave sites, unrelenting proof that even sabotage could not silence. The crowd, though distant now, became part of the chase. Spectators at the shore holding their phones high, recording every angle, every scream of engine, every ripple of water. The diaspora streams carried it further still, turning the pursuit into a trial watched by the world. The river itself became stage and witness. Moonlight stretched across it in silver ribbons, catching the spray from the racing hulls. Mangrove shadows lunged at their flanks, branches clawing the air like skeletal fingers. The skiff's engine coughed but held, and Adaeze's knuckles whitened around the prow as she leaned forward, eyes locked on the fleeing shape of Obiora, hunched at the bow of his boat. At the confluence where the Niger kissed the Benue, the two vessels finally drew parallel. Obiora's voice carried faintly over the wind, words shredded before they could land. "You'll drown with your truth," he bellowed, his arm waving, his face contorted by rage. But the wind was no ally. It tore his words to tatters and flung them back at him. Adaeze only saw a man shouting against the tide, powerless against forces larger than himself. She did not wait. Gritting her teeth, she shoved her weight against the skiff's prow and steered hard. The hull slammed against Obiora's with a sickening crack. The impact jolted through both boats, throwing Obiora off balance. He staggered, arms flailing. The crest ring he had worn as a symbol of power slipped loose in the chaos, catching moonlight one last time before it arced into the black water. Obiora pitched sideways, his agbada ballooning, and tumbled into the river with a splash that swallowed his roar. For a heartbeat, Adaeze's heart stopped. She saw him thrashing, saw his face surface in panic. She could have let the water take him. The crowd would have cheered. Justice would have seemed swift. But Mama Onome's words pressed against her ribs. A calabash that carried blood should not return to soup. Adaeze was not a murderer. She seized a coil of rope and hurled it toward him. "Take it!" she cried. Obiora's hands clawed at the rope, but the river had already judged him. The current pulled, his fingers slipped, his body dragged. Only when EFCC skiffs surged in, officers diving into the current, was he dragged coughing to shore. Hawa herself leaned down to cuff him, her voice steady as iron. "Chief Obiora Nwachukwu, you are under arrest for illegal bunkering, bribery, corruption, and conspiracy to murder." On the water, Femi steered their skiff into slow circles, scanning for the ring. "It's not gone," he muttered. He tied a magnet to a line, dropped it into the dark. Adaeze held her breath until, with a dull clink, metal met metal. The magnet rose heavy, dripping. At its end clung the crest ring, still gleaming faintly as though it had resisted burial. Femi bagged it carefully, sealing it in evidence tape. A symbol rescued not to be worn, but to testify. The coda of night unfolded like ritual. Hawa read Obiora, his Rights on the shore. Amara filming every word with a camera that did not tremble. Market mothers sang from the park, their ululation carrying across the water. Fishermen whistled in rhythm, voices braided into a folk hymn. Teenagers lit their torches and waved them high, chanting as the crowd became choir. The river returns names. Adaeze stood soaked, shivering, her hair clinging to her skin. Femi wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. Their bodies shook from cold and adrenaline, but together they felt alive in a way no words could capture. She leaned her forehead against his chest, hearing his heart hammer. "We made it," she whispered. He kissed the crown of her wet hair. "No," he said softly. "The river made it." But even as relief washed through them, danger whispered one more note. Among the confiscated phones Hawa's officers collected was Obiora's personal device. A forensic officer handed it over. Its battery was low, its screen cracked but alive. A new text buzzed in the silence. The words froze Adaeze where she stood. "You fell. We remain." From Obiora's seized phone, a last message gleamed, a shadow warning that his fall was only the beginning. The river had claimed one, but others still waited upstream. Empires crumble loudly, networks go quiet to grow again. The fall of Chief Obiora did not end with his arrest on the riverbank. It rippled outward like a stone striking the surface, circles widening until every corner of his empire trembled. Within days, EFCC officers under Hawa's command stormed Meridian Delta offices across Lagos, Warri, and Abuja. Servers were seized, ledgers bagged, accounts frozen. The once untouchable company boardmen who had strutted in corporate halls resigned en masse, their press releases hollow against the evidence playing non-stop on international news. The crest ring, now sealed and catalogued, became a symbol in itself, proof that no ornament, however gilded, could disguise the weight of crimes it adorned. The media, once silent, now turned rabid. Outlets that had spiked Amara's drafts only weeks before scrambled to cover every angle. Anchors who had praised Obiora's river cleanup campaign reappeared with solemn tones, narrating his fall as though they had always been suspicious. Headlines screamed betrayal. Talk shows dissected his double life. International journalists flew in, their cameras hungry for images of the mangrove graves, the river trial, the folk songs that had risen louder than Obiora's fireworks. What had been whispered in shadows was now screamed under floodlights. Yet amid the frenzy, the human cost surfaced. Hawa made sure the mangrove graves were exhumed with dignity. Forensic teams recovered bodies, while families gathered on the banks to identify loved ones from clothing scraps, Idaho cards, or scars. Adaeze filmed quietly, her lens respectful, her heart heavy. One mother collapsed when she saw her son's necklace lifted from the mud. Another family clutched hands, weeping in both sorrow and relief. The limbo of uncertainty had ended, even if the end was cruel. Hawa ordered the building of a memorial wall by the river, where names of the lost would be carved, a permanent reminder that the water had refused to hide what men tried to bury. Justice marched forward. Chief Obiora was charged formally with illegal bunkering, corruption, and accessory to murder. Several of his closest aides were arraigned beside him, their polished suits unable to shield them from the weight of evidence. Hawa stood firm in every hearing, her reputation growing as the officer who dared to drag giants into daylight. But life was not only trials and funerals. In the quieter corners, something new blossomed. Adaeze and Femi moved Mama Onome into a safer compound away from Kabawa, where the air was cleaner and her cough eased with rest. In the evenings, while they repaired nets and soldered radios, they spoke of the future. "A school," Femi said one night, soldering iron glowing in his hand. "Not just for repairs, for diving too, for teaching others how to see what the river shows." Adaeze smiled, her fingers brushing the cowrie at her wrist. "A place where children learn not to fear the water, but to listen to it." Their romance no longer needed to hide in glances. It spoke openly now, stitched into plans and promises. Amara, meanwhile, turned her defiance into infrastructure. She launched a crowd-funded River Justice Fund, channeling diaspora money into legal aid, relocation for whistleblowers, and scholarships for children of the missing. The SSD archive Ijiro's final gift was mirrored into the public domain, replicated across servers worldwide. If they try to kill it again, she declared, 1,000 copies will rise. But even in victory, whispers remained. A politician's aide resigned suddenly, citing personal reasons, though rumors said his name had appeared in ledger side notes. A judge recused himself from another oil case, muttering of conflicts of interest. The web, everyone realized, was wider than Obiora. He was a spider, yes, but not the only one. The elders in Lokoja shook their heads at every headline. They had seen empires rise and fall before. The river keeps walking, they said. One man's fall is only one bend in its path. Adaeze carried those words with her like another charm, a reminder that her work was not finished. One evening, as the heat folded into dusk, Amara opened her inbox. Among the usual chaos, a mix of congratulations, threats, and interview requests was a single attachment. No name, no message, only a file. She clicked it. A sketch filled her screen. Another crest, different from Obiora's, but unmistakably corporate. Beneath it, drawn faintly, were blue tarps shading barrels. Amara's blood ran cold. Another company, another current pulling. Amara stared at the anonymous sketch. Glowing on her screen, another crest, another tarp. Obiora had fallen, but the river was not yet finished. Every city is the sum of what it remembers and what it refuses to forget. The trial of Obiora left scars and possibilities in equal measure. When the courts confirmed his guilt, the fines and frozen assets were poured not into yet another pocket, but into restitution. Hawa fought for it, and the government shamed before both local and international cameras agreed. River schools were built along the banks, where children of fishermen learned not just reading and writing, but also water safety and ecology. Spill cleanups began, men and women scrubbing mangrove roots, blackened by years of hidden crimes. Scholarships were given out, specifically for divers who wanted to study river sciences. Market mothers chaired the restitution board themselves, refusing to let another round of professionals turn grief into profit. They sat in Ankara cloth and headscarves at long tables, signing off budgets with the authority of those who had buried too many sons. On Saturdays, Adaeze turned the restitution into life. She gathered girls at the jetty and taught them in classes she called River Tech. With the patience of someone who had learned in the hardest way, she showed them how to dive safely, how to treat the water with reverence, how to salvage what the current carried without losing themselves to it. Then she taught them the second skill, the one that had changed everything: phone forensics and citizen video. The river returns the truth, she told them, but you must know how to hold it. The girls laughed at her sternness, splashing water at each other, but when they handled the old devices she gave them, their eyes burned with purpose. Her days no longer ran alone. She and Femi co-ran a small solar, repair, and data rescue stall by the jetty, a hybrid of his old kiosk and her diving trade. Painted on its side was a mural of a cowrie, glinting like a promise. Villagers brought radios, torches, even battered laptops. Some whispered, "Can you also check this?" and handed them flash drives or phones, asking if Adaeze's hands could pull truth from circuits as easily as she did from nets. She and Femi worked side by side, soldering and swimming, their love steady, their glances no longer stolen but shared in open laughter. Sometimes, when their fingers brushed over a repaired circuit, it felt like a vow renewed. Inspector Hawa had not stopped either. She launched a citizen evidence portal, a system where fishermen could upload videos of spills or midnight barges without revealing names. It was rudimentary at first, but it grew. Pictures of leaking pipes, coordinates of strange boats, even recordings of hush money offered, all poured into the system, guarded by her small but incorruptible team. Hawa called it a civic shield, and though her colleagues mocked it at first, it became a net woven so tightly that silence could no longer buy its way through. Memory itself began to transform. On the wall that ran along Lokoja's riverside, artists painted a mural of a phone rising from the water. Its cracked screen glowed, and beneath it rolled waves that carried human silhouettes. Around the base were carved the names of the found, the boys and men who had once been hidden beneath tarps. Market women laid flowers there each market day. Fishermen poured libations before casting nets. The mural became pilgrimage and protest in one. The city's reminder that water returns what lies try to bury. At sunset, when the park quieted, Adaeze and Femi often sat on the embankment, her sketchbook open, his arm wrapped around her shoulders. They watched the water soften into evening silver. Mama Onome sometimes joined them, humming an old tune, her cough gentler now, her eyes following the currents as though she could still see spirits dancing on the surface. For the first time, Adaeze allowed herself to dream not of surviving another day, but of living into many. The moral lived inside every ripple. The river returns what lies try to bury. It had cost blood, fear, and fire, but it had spoken. And yet, even the softest endings carried whispers. One evening, as Adaeze traced the mural's curves with her pencil, a small voice tugged at her sleeve. A little girl, her eyes wide with innocence, held up a plastic toy phone, bright pink and half-cracked, plucked from the tide. "Auntie," she asked softly, "can you make this one tell the truth too?" Adaeze looked at the toy, then at the river. Her chest tightened with both sorrow and resolve. The city had not finished its stories. The river still had more to return. A child's toy phone bobbed to shore, tiny and broken, yet heavy with meaning. Adaeze smiled faintly because the city still had truths waiting to speak. If this story touched you, don't let it sink beneath the waves, keep it alive. Subscribe to the channel for more powerful Nigerian folk tales. Like and share so others can hear these voices. And tell me in the comments what the river whispered to you. Your voice is part of this journey, and the next story is already waiting.